to all storytellers and story lovers. My name is Laksh Datta. I host and produce the Jaipur Bites podcast, where you can hear many of the amazing sessions from the Jaipur Literature Festival. I also produce a few other podcasts, as you can see right here. English, Hindi, fiction, non-fiction. If you see something you like, maybe you can take a screenshot of this right now. I'll give you a second. And tune in later. Find them on your favorite podcast app.
We're delighted to welcome you to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol. It's a pleasure to present today the Spread of Buddhism, Himanshu Prabha Ray and John Guy in conversation with William Dalrymple. A session traversing the spiritual and archaeological path of the expansion of Buddhism, opening a fascinating window into its foundations, histories and traditions. It also gives a keen insight into the role of patronage and of Buddhist monks in spreading its ideas and philosophy. Academic and author Himanshu Prabha Ray talks of the expansion of Buddhism within India, while the senior curator for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, John Guy, explores the spread of Buddhism through Southeast Asia in conversation with festival co-director and author William Dalrymple. Himanshu Prabha Ray. Himanshu is an author and historian affiliated to the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. Her recent books include Coastal Shrines and Transnational Maritime Networks Across India and Southeast Asia, Archaeological and Buddhism in Southeast Asia, and The Return of the Buddha, Ancient Symbols for a New Nation. Our next speaker, John Guy. John is the Senior Curator of the Arts of South and Southeast Asia at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, and elected Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Society of Antiquaries, London. Formerly Curator of Indian Art at the V&A Museum London, he has curated numerous international art exhibitions and published widely, including Woven Cargoes, Indian Temple Culture, Interwoven Globe, Lost Kingdoms, Hindu-Buddhist Sculpture of Early Southeast Asia and Art and Independence, YG Srimati and the Indian Style. In conversation with William Dalrymple. William is the best-selling author of City of Djinns, From the Holy Mountain, Age of Kali, White Mughals, The Last Mughal, 9 Lives, Return of a King and Kohinoor. His most recent books are The Anarchy, The Relentless Rise of the East India Company and Forgotten Masters, Indian Painting for the East India Company. Dalrymple is one of the founders and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section on your screens. Ladies and gentlemen, now presenting The Spread of Buddhism, Himanshu Prabha Ray and John Guy in conversation with William Dalrymple. Enjoy the session.
Well, what a pleasure to have with us today two of my great heroes. Himanshu Prabha Ray is a national treasure, a pupil of Romula Thapa. She has pioneered a whole world of early Hindu and Buddhist studies and seafaring and the links between India and Southeast Asia, and produced a fantastic shelf of books on them, which I've been gradually working through over the last year. I just completed the last two, I think, of the collection today, other than her most recent one, which I need to now get. While John Guy is an extraordinary curator whose exhibition Lost Kingdoms set me off on a completely different trajectory and has been a fantastic and catalytic figure promoting the appreciation of early Indian sculpture and Indic sculpture in Southeast Asia. And again, like Himanshu, has an incredible bibliography that fills whole pages with these wonderful essays and work. We are short of time to cover an enormous amount of area, so I'm going to shut up and let Himanshu take over. They've both got 15 minutes to talk about their subjects. Himanshu on the spread of Buddhism within India. Then John Guy will take the story off to tell how Buddhism traveled southeastwards to become the dominant religion in Southeast Asia. And then we'll have a little discussion and hand it over. Right, Himanshu, off you go. You have a wonderful presentation for us, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you, William, for those very kind words. I'm delighted to be here and to share some of my research that I've been involved in over these years. So what I thought I would do is, while the spread of Buddhism in India is a huge topic, and so what I thought I would do is to focus on stoops, because the stoop, as you know, it symbolizes the Buddha. It was also built to enshrine the relics of the Buddha. And these stoops were discovered in the 19th and 20th century, and in a way have helped us reconstruct the journey of Buddhism in the subcontinent. So we're really concentrating on the stoop and how it was discovered and its story as we move through this first 15 minutes that I have. So if you look at the date of the Buddha, the date is 624 to 544 BCE. So really the 7th and 6th centuries BCE. And the texts say that after the Buddha's parinirvana, his relics were redistributed and stoops were built on these relics. But if one looks at the archaeological evidence, and if one looks at when the earliest stoops that were built, we do not really have anything prior to the Mauryan king Ashok, which is the 3rd century BCE. King Ashok in his inscriptions does refer to some early stoops, but essentially the surviving stoops are really 2nd century BCE onwards. So the first point is there is a time lag. The tradition certainly talks about distribution of the relics after the parinirvana of the Buddha. There's also another tradition, which is again a very prominent tradition, which is a 2nd century CE tradition within the Buddhist textual sources, which again credits Ashok with the redistribution of the relics and the fact that he built 84,000 stoops. So the number, as you can see, by the 2nd century CE has increased enormously. Equally fascinating is the fact that the disciplinary rules for the monks and nuns, the Pali Vinaya, contains no rules which govern the behavior of monks and nuns with regard to the stoop. So clearly we have a whole lot of issues and challenges which we need to discuss and talk about. This is a visual from Gandhar, 1st, 2nd century CE relief from Swat in Pakistan. And it shows you the 8 reliquaries which indicate the division of the relics into 8 by the Brahman just after the parinirvana of the Buddha. The earliest stoops look like this. And this is what the early travelers would have seen in the Northwest, because these are the kind of brick structures or brick mounds as they are, which dotted the landscape. So how were they discovered? I suggest that, especially in the 19th century, they were discovered accidentally, while some of the early travelers, military officials, were more familiar with the Greeks, were more familiar with Alexander the Great, and they were essentially looking for remains of the Greeks, and in the process discovered many of the stoops that we know of today. Others were discovered while laying down railway lines or surveying for roads. There was also an overlap between espionage and antiquarian activities. And this is one of the 1830, one of the earliest stoops now in Pakistan at the site of Manikyala near Islamabad, which was excavated by General Ventura, who was one of the French officers in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's army. He was not looking for a Buddhist stoop. He was looking for the remains of Alexander's horse, but found the stoop. And as you can see in that diagram, what he also found was that the stoops contained enormous treasures, as it were. Gold coins, reliquaries, relics made out of gold and silver, the reliquaries which you see on the top, and certainly the relics and bones and ash. And these were placed at regular intervals. So the stoop was not merely a mound of brick, but contained within a whole history of its construction and its survival through the centuries. I'd mentioned that there was an overlap in espionage and antiquarian activities. And in this context, Charles Mason becomes quite important for our purposes. He was a deserter from the East India Company. and he collected a large number of coins, particularly in Afghanistan, in the Kabul Jalalabad area. These were often bilingual coins. So they had Greek on one side and what was then an unidentified script on the other, which you see in the center of the slide. But these scripts were then deciphered and read as Kharoshthi and Brahmi. Another discovery, of course, was when railway lines were laid out, and particularly this enormous copper image of the Buddha, which is more than life-size, dated to the 6th and 7th centuries, was found during construction of the East Indian Railway. The railway engineer, Mr. Harris, he stands next to the Buddha image, and you can see the difference, and you can see the size of the Sultanganj Buddha, which was found in Bhagalpur district in Bihar, 1861-62. This enormous image is now in Birmingham Museum. So the beginning of archaeology, so far I've talked about accidental discoveries. The beginning of archaeology really starts with the setting up of the Archaeological Survey of India in 1861. Alexander Cunningham was the first Director General, and he was an avid follower of, should one say, Buddhism. He wanted to search for sites associated with the life of the Buddha. He had two models to follow. One was the Chinese pilgrim, the 7th century Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who came to India. His travel account had been translated into English, and that formed one of the ways in which Alexander Cunningham looked for sites associated with the life of the Buddha. The other, of course, were the Sri Lankan chronicles, the Mahavansa, which again was very late, much after the life of the Buddha, 4th, 5th century CE. But that's another text that Cunningham relied on to identify and to work out the life of the Buddha and the sites associated with the historical Buddha. The Archaeological Survey also had another dimension, conservation. And we saw the brick mounds earlier on, which was what remained of these stoops in the 19th century. But in the 20th century, these were then conserved. And at the bottom of this slide, you can see the nicely conserved stoops at Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh. What is also extraordinary are the English gardens around them, the green lawns. And Sanchi, of course, is a World Heritage Site. But something which I would like you to consider is the fact that this conservation also missed out an important clue of the stoops, which informed us not just about what was inside them and what related to the life history of the stoop, but also the way in which it was perceived and revered by worshippers. And by this, I mean the sphere of sacrality around the stoop. This is from the excavations of John Marshall, early 20th century excavations at Takshila in Pakistan. As you will notice on this, there is a main stoop in the center, but there are smaller stoops, a ring of smaller stoops all around. These were built much after the main stoop. But the point I'm making is that the area continued to be sacred and continued to be in worship for a very long time. And these smaller votive stoops or smaller stoops contained the relics of either important monks and nuns, important people. And so there was this whole area around the stoop which kind of got wiped out after conservation, as we saw in the Sanchi, where the lawns are laid and we do not have this sort of complex alive as it is here. This is a site which is much later. This was done by the Archaeological Survey of India, the site of Ratnagiri. It was excavated by a lady archaeologist, Devala Mitra, and her reports are really interesting and fascinating. But the point I want to make here is that you can see the smaller stoops still preserved and still conserved at the site. So Coming to how then do we see the agency for the spread of Buddhism? We've looked through the stoops, we've seen the kind of challenges they present, also the kind of richness and wealth that was incorporated within them. I had also mentioned that many of them were associated with Ashok and his emissaries, and certainly in Buddhist history and Buddhist texts, Ashok, King Ashok, the Mauryan King Ashok, 3rd century BCE, figures very prominently in the for the spread of Buddhism. Another agency is also the merchants, and we have several visualizations of merchants either gifting the property to the Buddhist Sangha, or also setting up stoops. Bhallika, Tapusa and Bhallika set up stoops in Orissa after they took hair from the Buddha, and these relics were then enshrined in these. But this data, this evidence kind of doesn't quite match what you get from inscriptions. The inscriptions refer to monks and nuns as being really the major agency for the spread of Buddhism, and not so much the others. And clearly the monks and nuns figure very importantly in the inscriptions. And of course, the historians, when they look or when they study the spread of Buddhism, they look at urban centers and the way in which urban centers led to the spread of Buddhism. But one thing is very clear, which is that at many of the sites, Sanchi we just saw, this is from Sarnath, a visual of an early excavation, early 20th century excavation, 1905 excavation at Sarnath near Varanasi. You see the Ashokan pillar in the foreground, the lion capital just behind, and it is very evident from sites like Sarnath, Sanchi and others that monastic centers expanded enormously near, and especially when these monastic centers were located close to the Ashokan pillars. And this is a good example of both the pillar and the lion capital, which were recovered during excavations in the early 20th century. And as you know, the lion capital and the Ashokan chakra are both symbols which are very important in the history of India, particularly the history of independent India. But before I go to that, just one more point I would like to make, which is that the Ashokan pillars had a life of their own long after the Mauryan king Ashok. Many other kings inscribed their inscriptions on these pillars, and these pillars were also transferred to other places, the Delhi Firoz Shah Kotla pillar being a good example of this. But let me end by just highlighting the enormous significance and importance of Ashoka, not just for the spread of Buddhism, but also with regard to our national emblem and the national symbols. You see the chakra on the Indian flag and the lion capital as the national symbol. So with that, I end, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Himanshu, thank you so much. Fantastic. I'm going to go straight on to John and then return to you during the question time. John, do you want to take the story on? So okay. Buddhism starts in Bihar, it spreads throughout India. What happens next?
Thank you, William, and thank you, Professor Ray. That was a wonderful overview. My brief is to speak on the spread of Buddhism to Southeast Asia, and this raises many interesting questions and keeps us firmly in the first millennium AD. So how and when did Buddhism first spread from the Indian subcontinent to Southeast Asia? It would appear in my reading to be a relatively swift process and linked primarily to the prior expansion of Buddhism into the Deccan and into southern India. This took place incrementally as Buddhism, as a relatively new and actively evangelizing faith movement, spread, causing new stupas to be built, or as the Buddha himself instructed, stupas to be built, quote, where none existed before. So very much pushing to new frontiers. And this seems to be the movement from the Gangetic Valley regions of northern India down into the Deccan and beyond into southern India. The transmission to Sri Lanka represents a different trajectory and an early story which links right back to the time of Emperor Ashoka. The institution of monastic Buddhism can be traced again back to the lifetime of the Buddha and his assembly of monks at Jetavana Parkland and Travasti in UP, and proved to be an effective tool for the propagation of Buddhism. The intersection of trade routes and location of monasteries is a very clear one, and ties us right back into the patronage patterns that supported the spread and expansion of Buddhism. So not only the wealth of the merchant communities who funded the monasteries, but also the medium of trade which facilitated the dispersal of Buddhist teachings, the safe passage of monks, and so on, throughout India initially, and then indeed beyond to Southeast Asia. The spread of Buddhism to Southeast Asia seems to be linked to the booming maritime trade along the littorals of the Bay of Bengal, linking Bengal, Orissa, ancient Andhra Desa to Peninsula and island Southeast Asia in a dynamic trading system that featured goods, people, religious ideas and their agents, and presumably religious imagery, reflecting various regional styles. For this very early period, we have, I won't say very little archaeological evidence, but it is growing, particularly excavations in the Thai Peninsula producing artifacts from the early centuries BC that bear witness to this exchange system was taking place, pushing back in time our understanding of the interactions across the Bay of Bengal. Despite being overtly Indic in subject matter and iconography, the art of Southeast Asia, particularly the Buddhist art of Southeast Asia, is so unmistakably un-Indian that no work of art that I will show today would be mistaken for being a product of a sculptor's workshop in the subcontinent of India and subcontinental India. How and why these great sculptural traditions emerged so quickly in Southeast Asia and with a distinctly local character, flavor, physiognomy, and above all style remains an open question. The early Buddhist and Hindu art of early Southeast Asia was associated with a series of regional kingdoms whose histories are rather sketchy and incomplete at best. In brief, these are the Pyu in Myanmar, the Mon in central Thailand, the Khmers of Funan and Chen La, equivalent to modern-day Cambodia, the Chams of coastal Vietnam, and the great maritime polity of Srivijaya, which extended its tendrils up the Thai Peninsula into Western Indonesia, and also probably from Sumatra to Palembang. The early evidence we have is essentially non-literary or its contact, and we see it in terms of the residual artifacts that survive from Indian merchant activity in Southeast Asia. So the upper left on the screen is merchant seal with the sailing ship, clearly produced from an Indian mold, probably Bengali, and recovered in central Thailand. Below that, a Roman coin. And many of you will be familiar with the remarkable fact that the largest hoards of Roman coinage recovered outside Northern Europe have been recovered in India, particularly in southern India. And here we have a Roman coin, almost certainly came via India and was excavated in Utong in central Thailand, but minted in Roman Germany in the 3rd century. And finally, that had a line drawing of an ivory comb, almost certainly Andhra Pradesh production, again from a site near Lapuri in central Thailand. So all of these, and there are many other examples, bear witness to this exchange system was taking place. The earliest inscriptions that we have, when we start to look at the epigraphic evidence, however, give a slightly different picture. The first names that appear of local rulers, which are already Sanskritized names, are those of Mulavarman and Pulavarman. Mulavarman, you see in the stele on the right, on the screen, is one of 7 stones which are self-identified in the inscription as Yupa stones, that is their sacrificial posts. And Yupas have a long tradition, of course, in Vedic ritual. These 7 stones were recovered on the east coast of Kalimantan at Borneo in Old Money. Remarkable because this is an isolated backwater place today. But clearly in the 4th or 5th century AD, it was connected very actively to an Indic culture that was moving around the region, including people who had command of Sanskrit and the associated Brahmanical culture. So very, very revealing in terms of the impact and the penetration of Indic culture in the region by this early period. On the left of the same screen is the slightly later rock-cut inscription of Pulavarman from the king of a well-known ruler of the kingdom of West Java. This dates probably to around the 6th century, and which he identifies himself closely with Vishnu, and particularly Grama Vishnu, the 3 strides that encircle the world, and the inscription speaks of self-eulogizing of Pulavarman as a great king whose footprints are the same as those of Vishnu. And then you have these wonderful cursive markings, what often called shell script, above the footprints, which almost certainly talismanic. And it's, where is it located? It's located in a river which deified and branched around, forming an actual island, which is thought to be in the citadel of this ruler. So the presence of the inscription in the river, where it will be illustrated by the seasonal flooding, points to the power, the magical power of these markings. We have more tangible evidence. Why were the Indians there so early? One of the major factors is the well-known insatiable appetite that subcontinental India has for gold, and its important place in as a store of wealth, and particularly of matriarchal wealth, and passing of wealth through the female line. So the gathering of gold in Southeast Asia seems to have been a major factor. And upper left, we have this, what is the earliest Tamil Brahmi inscription recovered from Southeast Asia, probably 2nd or 3rd century AD, identifying it as the touchstone of a goldsmith, Karamal, found on the Thai Peninsula near Krabi, got some years ago. Very, very important witness to this process of not only sourcing gold in Southeast Asia, but actively processing it also in the region. And below, a fragment of Indic pottery, or with Tamil, and again, Tamil Brahmi, traces of Tamil Brahmi inscription, again recovered from the Thai Peninsula. Why were these ideas accepted so readily? I think one of the reasons is that so much shared imagery that was already in place in Southeast Asian cultures, the importance of water, the importance of snakes, and the fact that we're in a tropical zone. And so on the left, I show you this very famous 7th century, what's called a curse inscription. It's a oath of loyalty to a local ruler inscribed on this stele, which was clearly intended to be illustrated. You see the little spout at the bottom for the lustration waters to be collected and protected by the hood of a naga above. That translates very quickly and seamlessly into images of a familiar subject, the naga protected Buddha, which in Indian, specific Indian contexts we call the Buddha Mukhalinda. Whether that name was applied in Southeast Asia is less clear to us. So you can see the way that these ideas marry very comfortably into a Southeast Asian setting. But also there was the very real agency of objects traveling, of images. On the left is what we think is the earliest stone Buddha ever found in mainland Southeast Asia, from Peninsular Thailand, now in the National Museum in Bangkok. And on the right, one of a series of spectacular, much later, probably second half of the 1st millennium, 1 meter high bronze Buddhas. These are large gold figures. Example on the screen from Sulawesi, found a century ago. Another is here, the so-called Dong Duong Buddha from central Vietnam, excavated within the context of a 9th century Mahayana monastery near Da Nang, but almost certainly, and the general consensus now, but all of us who think about these questions, is that it's originated in Sri Lanka. So clearly witnessing, these are what we call the missionary bronzes, missionary Buddhas, which traveled, and high investment. I mean, these were expensive objects in their day, and would have not been just peddled by itinerant traders on the off chance you'd find a keen Buddhist to buy it. These must have been commissioned. So you get a sense of the whole process of an interaction, long distance trade, which included religious imagery. Small portable images, they can travel easily. Monks can take them along with the texts in their possessions. And we have Faxian and other Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who make reference to carrying images with them. They probably carried light portable sandalwood, ivory, these materials that are perishable and lost to us, but also metal objects. Both of these images are, I would argue, Sri Lankan in origin. On the left was found in central Thailand, on the right in central Java. Stupas themselves, with the notable exception of Sanchi and Sarnath, which have been conserved in India. We don't really know the true profiles of the originals. We have some of the most complete surviving early stupas survive outside India. And I show you on the screen two remarkable examples. On the left, the restored stupa at Nakhon Si Thammarat, which is a Dwaravati foundation, extremely early, somewhere in the mid-first millennium, and was restored by Rama V at the end of the 19th century to its present state as it is now. And on the right, the Dordoji stupa at Sisestra in central Burma, which marked one of the 4 access gates to the ancient city. These are spectacular, and the profiles are very distinctive and rather conical and tall, and resemble, they're witnessed in terracottas from the same place and time, and they're also mirrored in many of the relief depictions we get from Nagarjunakonda and elsewhere that give us a clue to what the Andhra Buddha stupa types, of which we have very little surviving. Chandavaram, I think was on, Professor Ray showed earlier, as one example, but there are very few surviving in much beyond their foundations. Well, stupas have a purpose. They're there to house relics and to honor the teachings of the Buddha and the corporeal remains of the Buddha. And here we have what is arguably the single most important stupa find, or one of the greatest stupa finds, perhaps the most spectacular, of a scale we see witnessed in relief depictions in India. Recall the parading of relics on elephants on the Barhood reliefs and so on. We see these large containers being carried by noble donors and being honored for deposit. Here we have an excavation in 1926 in Sisestra in the excavation of a stupa. The brick chamber, which you see below the stone slab, which was associated with the chamber, we don't know its precise relationship, whether it was a cover or lining was not clear. But at the heart of the relic chamber was this large reliquary. It's over 14 inches in diameter, gilt silver, with the 4 past Buddhas, including of the present age, the 3 past Buddhas and the present Buddha around it, Pali and Pew inscriptions, including Sanskritized names of a royal donor couple, male and female, spectacular. So there's a whole group of quite extraordinary relic objects which came from this one hoard. There's evidence of redeposit, which was quite common, and so various items date from different periods. The other great site, which moves us into later periods, is Kedah in the Malay Peninsula. The Bujang Valley is very important, and as a major trading entrepot, this was the Kala of the Arabic navigators from the later first millennium. We have 2 important Buddhist remains, these 2 stelae, which both show stupas and carry Pali Yedama verses on them. Essentially, they're thanksgiving memorials to safe passage. One is identifies the mariner as Buddhagupta, coming from the land of the red earth, which the consensus is now that this suggests that he was operating from Bengal or Bengali origin. So these witness the trading system in probably around the 5th and 6th centuries. Ditto the small Buddha in the Gupta manner, which is also recovered from the same site. Professor Ray mentioned, of course, the role of the agency of monks in the transmission of Buddhism. Very important. We have the extraordinary body of literature from the early 5th century with Farsian through to the 8th century, a whole cluster of remarkable first-hand accounts, indeed the only eyewitness accounts we have to Buddhism in the region. And witnessed also by multiple clay moldings, which allowed for the propagation of Buddhism. And we know the molds circulated to produce these easy things to transport, and then multiple images to be made as acts of merit-earning activity. The images themselves become really very spectacular. And I show you just 3 images of the Buddhas, each in a distinctive style. This is Chenlar, early Cambodia, 5th century, 6th and 7th century Thailand, some of the greatest Buddha types that we have surviving today. And none of these could be at any point be mistaken for Indian production. They're clearly talking in a local voice already, although the attributes, all the outward signs are Indian and Buddhist. The language, the stylistic language being used is not. We come to the great symbol of Buddhism, of course, is the wheel symbolizing the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma chakra mounted on a pillar, the stamba, a great symbol associated with kingship and the Buddha's teaching. And here, of course, it was celebrated, the only place outside India where this form found expression, and for reasons we don't know why it's so limited, appears only in the Mon culture of Dwaravati kingdom in central Thailand, as an example here. And of course, it's modeled on the great types we know from the Andhra territories. This is an Amaravati pillar in the British Museum, where you see the full assembly of pillar and wheel, and the great surviving wheel at Amaravati Museum, 1 meter in diameter. So this is the prototype. The Indian ones almost invariably pierced. The spokes of the wheel, open work. The Southeast Asian ones are solid. This is your way in which the wheel is associated with the Chakravartin. This is one of the great early Andhra images of the king as divine ruler, Chakravartin, universal sovereign, and one of his 7 jewels, his 7 symbols of divine authority is the wheel of the Buddha's teachings, represented in its relief. And then we see it replicated in small portable motifs on the right from Thailand. Great Buddha images, the beginnings of serial imagery of Buddhas, the excavations in the lower right of the one of the stupa sites at Nakhon Pathom, and one of the Buddhas from that site we have on the screen as sublimely beautiful, produced in replication and serial Buddha images, just as we see in modern Thai monasteries today. On occasions, rare occasions, new image types emerge, which have a very specific historical moment and the agency of an own individual. And I argue with it, the image of the Bodhisattva Amakapasha, you see on the screen here, and many of you will recognize on the left the great stone piece that was excavated at Sarnath in the 1970s, oh sorry, at Nalanda in the 1970s, 8th century. And what is less familiar is the bronze in the center of the screen, which was excavated from a site that's now completely lost to us in the Malay Peninsula, but which almost certainly represented a major monastery somewhere in Malaya in the 8th century. Of course, this,
John, I'm going to have to break in there. We've gone a little bit over time.
Fist and glove into what we know about the movement of one of the great teachers, Vajrabodhi, who was summoned to China in 720 to teach and propagate his teachings, the Buddhist teachings, but sojourned in Southeast Asia for, we think, around 2 years, teaching at Srivijaya. And it may well be that he was also based in Kedar or somewhere close by in the Malay Peninsula, and that this image, this major cult image, is a legacy of his teachings at that time and his propagation of the Amagapacha cult.
John, I'm going to have to break in, I'm afraid, there. We're running out of time.
I show you this terracotta over life size, quite spectacular, and a junta just for fun, to show the lineage of the crown types. And just to conclude, 2 images which address the issue of rivalry and competition between the Buddhists and the Brahmanical teachers. And this is a spectacular 1 meter high depiction of the miracles of Shravasti, of a scale and importance that conflates 2 of the particular legends. I have no time to go into the detail, but into this large narrative scene which honors the Buddha prevailing over a heretic of a Brahmanical teacher, seen lower right, falling back in horror at the power of the Buddha's teachings. And finally, a scene which is unheard of in India and unique indeed to Thailand is this rock-cut cave interior relief which shows the Buddha prevailing over Shiva and Vishnu. Here he is enthroned, teaching and attending him. One is the seated figure of Shiva, and standing next to him, his arms folded across his chest, in deference as Vishnu. So clearly propaganda art in which the Buddhists were promoting a very clear message about their relationship to the rival Indic religions that were circulating at this time. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. That's fantastic. Between the 2, you've painted a spectacular panorama. I'd like to hone in particularly on the role of merchants, which is something that Himanshu has written a great deal about and very important in your story, John. How much in early India was Buddhism, in India, first of all, and then we'll go next to the Southeast Asian situation. How much in India was Buddhism propagated by and patronized by the merchant classes? Himanshu first?
Yeah, no, certainly if you look at the inscriptions and, the donations that are made at many of the Buddhist monastic sites, they come from merchants, and I can name Kanheri, for example, where money is given, land is donated by merchants, and also many others, Bharod, Sanchi, Mathura, Amravati. So the patronage for many of these large Buddhist sites in India was certainly coming from merchants and trading groups, and also many of the artisanal and occupational groups, goldsmiths and so on.
Ivory workers.
That's very clear from the inscriptions.
John, you showed those 2 images of the Vedic sacrificial post, and I think both of them were Hindu and associated with kings. Again, do you get the impression that Hinduism in Southeast Asia is very much the business of the state and the building up of kingdoms, while Buddhism is passed on by merchants and by missionary monks? Or is that not a distinction you can make?
Well, that's a very interesting point you raise, William, because it's certainly clear, and at the very beginnings of Indic culture, witnessed by the first inscriptions, that Vaishnavism was terribly important in helping to shape a local concept of kingship, so those early centuries of the mid-first millennium, this is critical. What we see emerging in the later first millennium is the an assertion of Shaivism over that. It's clear that they were hedging their bets. We have in the Dong Duong monastery, where we saw that great Sri Lankan Buddha from Champa in central Vietnam, where that was recovered. That is a Mahayana monastery founded in the mid-9th century by a local king, Interwoven II, I think. And he states in that inscription that this great monastery in honor of the Buddha was created with the permission of Shiva, essentially, under an umbrella of power authority. So that's what I've called Shiva's land in some writings. It's a vision in which the whole landscape, religious landscape, Shiva prevails, but within that other systems operate. And we see this curious juxtaposition preserved today in modern Southeast Asia, in which Brahmanical rituals are still important, abhisheks and so on, in royal consecration ceremonies and so on, in Thailand, Cambodia and so on. But the king is the official protector of Buddhism. So both these things somehow coexist. And you see an array of Brahmanical deities worshipped in Thailand today, of course, within what's a strong Buddhist context.
One last question before we run out of time. Today we have a very clear image of India with its modern political boundaries. We think of Burma and Southeast Asia as somewhere different and quite separate, even a different region. But you've painted a picture of a kind of a single cultural world spanning the Bay of Bengal. Do you think that India had a very clear entity which ended at sort of the end of Bengal, or did it spill culturally, both in pre-Buddhist and in Buddhist times and with the spread of Hinduism, right over eastwards? Himanshu, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. No, I certainly argue that it was, it was much larger. And no, also I think what one needs to understand is that map making or cartography, the way we see it now, the nation state, that's really a much later development. And if one is looking at the past in which these divisions did not exist, I think it's somewhat erroneous to argue still for those divisions, at a time when these were non-existent. So certainly what one needs to look at are much more roots, much more, coastal networks, much more shrines, and their connections, their connectivity. So I'm arguing for connectivity across the ocean rather than looking at national identities.
Boundaries. You get a very clear picture of Naga cults and water deities and yakshis pre-existing not only in, predating Buddhism, not only in India, but also in Southeast Asia. Is there some reason to believe that there is this sort of cultural commonality out of which, a common soil out of which Buddhism and Hinduism grows, not only in India, but also in Southeast Asia?
Absolutely. I alluded to the importance of the Nagas, for example, having very powerful cults in Southeast Asia, and that's pre-Buddhist, and nature worship in various forms of what in India we call yaksha, yaksha cults and so on, are certainly prevalent and have an afterlife in early India, pre-Indic Southeast Asia, and have an afterlife. We look at the Nats in Burma, for example, the equivalent, the same things exist in nature cults in Cambodia today, and so on. So there's an incredible continuity and many shared values. I think to address your earlier point about the extent to which the whole region was continuum, I think this is very true, and certainly the Bay of Bengal was a key circulation region linking up all of these centers. But the peoples themselves were already, in a sense, distinct, and that's defined ethnically and defined linguistically. And so you have the Pew, you have the Mon, and the Chum and the Khmer speakers and so on, the later arrival of the Thai-speaking peoples and the Malay, early Malay language and so on. All of these were already distinct entities. And to some degree, those regional identities do morph into later states. So you get a hint of what's there already by looking at these. Were they all interconnected? Yes, absolutely. They were informed by dynamics of exchange.
We've sadly run out of time. I think we could all talk for a whole day on this, but thank you
Yes.
so much. And
Thank you.
Fantastic introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Himanshu Prabha, John Guy and William Dalrymple for this wonderful, wonderful session. We also thank our celebration partner, Diageo. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been critically impacted by the pandemic, and while we have braced ourselves to embrace the new normal, we have struggled to ensure that we can continue to bring you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. We'd love for you to support us at Teamwork Arts. Also, please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 at @Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. Hope to see you in the next session. Thank you so much.